for everybody else. Oftentimes it feels that we exist for the politicians and their pet causes.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Republicans, Democrats are really horribly corrupt.
Oh, yeah.
And I realize that all these politicians, like Schumer, they're making money outside, like with China. They're making so much money, and they have investments in outside the United States, and they don't really care. We're useless now. As far as New York goes, we had our say. Now we're useless. We're no longer needed, and they don't care. And it seems like it's just too overwhelmingly corrupt.
Yeah. I'm one of the most highly regulated industries, or it was until a couple of years ago. But yet, people in Congress can engage in insider trading with basically no repercussions.
I know, like Nancy Pelosi. I mean, what are we going to do about it? So, as how can we bring this? How can we bring the working class people?
Vote these people out. Vote. That's the answer. Vote them out. Someone else have a question back there?
So I wanted to say thank you for everything you're trying to do, and I hope you will succeed. I wanted to share a different perspective. I have not lived in New York City or New York State for over 30 years. I lived in Oregon and I lived in Idaho most recently. I came back because of an abusive situation that I had to escape from in Idaho. But it's a very safe, peaceful place. I really like it and miss it. Anyway, both in Oregon and Idaho, I was only in Idaho for 2 years and the rest in Oregon, a dozen eggs just recently went up from $1.29 a dozen to $1.39 a dozen. I get to New York City and it's $3.99 a dozen.
Yeah.
In the first 3 supermarkets I went to, afterwards I got a little lower price. So it seems to me, I mean, it shouldn't be that much more expensive for eggs in New York than it is on the West Coast. It seems to me there's price fixing going on. And that's probably not your purview, but if it is going on and you can expose that, you'll be such a hero. I think you'll snap the election.
Well, it isn't, but think about it, it isn't just the commodity itself or the product itself.
No, it's the
It's everything else. So it's like, for example, when I say at gas stations, why is this gas station over here, the price is here, and over here is less? Well, is this one next to the highway? This one is not. The one next to the highway, the real estate is more expensive. But here, the problem with New York is that across the board, even before you get to the product, everything is so expensive. The cost of living here is so cripplingly high and only gets worse that even to go to a bodega or a corner store or supermarket,
What are you going to do?
you know, the $3.30 or what have you, it's taken into account all the other things that go into it, obviously the rent, the place, all the other expenses that you have to deal with. I mean, if that person sold it for $1.29, which would be great, or less, you know, then you wonder again why, you know, they might not be able to make ends meet, but then you understand why people keep leaving the state and why we need to make the state, let's say, more business and taxpayer friendly. On a big picture, you know, the controller is not the legislator. I can't lower taxes myself, but I can push, and I can use my bully pulpit, and I can use my power of auditing and of investigating the different agencies to make sure that money's not being squandered. Push for reductions in spending, because again, as I was mentioning with the inflation, the only way we're going to be able to deal with this inflation, there's two ways. If we're going to have to deal with high inflation, raise taxes or lower spending. Raising taxes is untenable, unless we just want to shoot ourselves in the foot more and have even more people leave New York. So the only thing we can do is reduce spending, and as we reduce spending and try to take the bloat of government, which is not something done overnight, but if you have no one pushing for that, it's never going to happen. We need to bring that down, and that's the only thing that's going to help bring the cost of living down to any kind of attainable way. But this is what we're facing. I think even with a gargantuan amount of effort, things are going to get, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, and I mean very blunt with you, are going to be pretty bad the next couple of years. Whether Republicans win, whether Democrats win. I think if the Democrat Party wins with the people they have now, things are just going to get much worse. We're going to at least put things into place that are going to try to reduce spending, that are going to try to make the state less oppressive and onerous for people, that are going to be reducing regulations so someone can start a business with having red tape going ad nauseum, that big companies who are here, who work here, don't say, yeah, you know, we can leave. It's like someone asked me last year, is it true that companies, particularly in Wall Street, that they'll leave if we don't do something? I go, of course. I mean, is it just a threat or could they really do it? I said, well, I'm sure it's a little bit of both because it's a negotiating tactic. But of course they would. I mean, after 9/11, a lot of those firms, especially their back office operations, they moved to Jersey City, they moved to Tennessee, they moved to different places. They never came back. You think with the stuff that's going on now, and then after the lockdown, I think the Democrats didn't realize that when you put people at home for a year, 2 years, and you show them that they could work without having to commute 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, or, you know, 2 to 3 hours a day, what have you, that some of these, like say, investment bankers went to Arizona, went to Georgia, went to Florida, and did their job from there, and they still made the same New York money and the same New York stuff. Why are they going to come back here and say? I mean, I love New York. Don't get me wrong, but you know, so it's. You know, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but all I can tell you is that we need to reduce spending, we need to make the state more taxpayer and business friendly, and we're not going to solve the problem overnight, even if you like Republicans, but you're going to get, I think, a lot farther the way there by electing us than by electing what you have there now.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, tell the Democrats, what have you done for me lately?
Nothing.
Do you?
Or more like, what have you done to me lately?
What's your take on counties upstate as far as red, blue? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the way New York typically is, I mean, obviously New York City,
New York City's.
it's deeper blue, right? I mean, you got your pockets here, like where I live, that even if it's blue, they'll still mostly vote Republican, or they're more traditional or more conservative, little c conservative. But upstate that's actually where most of the Republican is. I mean, mind you, still in the major population centers like right in Buffalo and Syracuse and some of the larger cities, right in the city, it's tends to lean more left, but then across the board, and particularly in the more rural areas, I mean, you sometimes forget you're in New York. I sometimes think I'm back in Georgia. You know, you have, these guys are very rural. They love their guns. Don't even talk about taking my guns away. And they're very hardcore Republican, or at least if they don't, you know, they lean to the right or more traditional, if you will. I'm
Why
sorry.
would people want to vote for somebody who's not going to help you, or not going to work with you as a citizens, Americans? Why would, I don't understand how people here
Shut the
would vote
camera.
Ask
Democrats.
anybody who voted for Biden.
Shut the camera and I'll tell you.
I'd say tribalism. I mean, and I think I've said this before, unfortunately, and you know, and as a Hispanic Republican, you know, because I'm being told I'm Hispanic, I'm supposed to somehow, I have to be a Democrat.
Right.
Although I've never felt really like a Democrat. I think when I was 19 years old, I was asked, Paul, are you a Republican or Democrat? And I said, well, I don't know, I guess I'm Latino, I'm Latin, so I guess I must be a Democrat. The guy said, no way, no way. So that's what prompted me eventually to go to my first college Republican meeting, and then I realized, oh yeah, I don't think I'm a Democrat. So, but the point being that the Democratic Party talks a lot about diversity, or the left, let's say the progressive, the left. They talk a lot about diversity, but what does diversity mean to them when it gets down to it? And like I say, it's a very shallow, very cynical concept. Because their idea of diversity is having a bunch of people, like they say, that looks like American. They all look different. But they all think exactly the same way that they tell them that they have to.
Right.
And the way that, the moment you exercise free thought, the moment you might even question their orthodoxy, not even saying that they're against the orthodoxy, just question it. You know, it's intolerable. It's not tolerable. You're going to be accused. All of a sudden, all these people who like to talk to you about how racist you are, oh, that's a triggering word, you can't say this, you can't say that. All of a sudden, if you're one of the oppressed minorities that kind of questions any of the left-wing orthodoxy, all of a sudden, that restraint that they supposedly show about not being triggering and not saying racist things, all of a sudden, no, they'll call you whatever name they can think of. They'll treat you worse than any Southerner ever treated me. Let me tell you, when I lived down in Georgia, in the most Klan country that I lived at, and they'll do it justifiably. They'll think that they're right to do so, because it's like, you know, like with Clarence Thomas. Well, skin folk ain't kinfolk. Just because he's black doesn't mean he's really black. He's a white supremacist. Ben Shapiro, just because he's an Orthodox Jew, doesn't mean he's not a fascist Nazi. Vice versa. I'm Puerto Rican, or I'm Latino. Just because I'm Latino doesn't mean I hate Mexican. I don't hate Mexicans. Even though I'm married to a Mexican woman and two of my daughters are half Mexican, you know, because somehow then all of a sudden, doesn't matter what you look like, who you are, or what you think, or what's in your blood. No, their definition of diversity, again, it's not what I was told when I was applying for colleges in high school, you know. All the booklets said, diversity, diversity. Why did they want diversity? Not because, you know, part of it later has become just because they want nice pictures that look nice. But the idea was, we want diversity of opinion because people from different backgrounds bring different ideas for the discussion, different ideas to the debate. That doesn't exist in college campuses nowadays.
No.
That doesn't exist. And if you try to do that, you're triggering somebody. Yeah, you need to be, I mean, it's interesting. Colleges are not the place to sort of form your opinions or to kind of develop your mental faculties or anything. Colleges have become the place of indoctrination.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, it becomes like a hive mind.
Yeah.
They operate in the same way and they only follow their master's orders.
Exactly.
Now,
And if you don't, they'll expel you like the drone bees in the wintertime.
question about New York City. They have a surplus, is that correct, of $8 billion or so? Did you hear about that?
No.
Yeah, $8 billion.
Oh, actually, yes. Yes.
So $8 billion from the pandemic. So they get all that money, and you know, I don't have a contract for my union. You know, I've been waiting to negotiate for a couple of years. So as inflation goes up and my home heating oil goes up, I will be picking cans. I'm making sure I keep this bottle. It's a nickel. So every nickel counts. And so they have so much money now. So they're going to make sure they steal more of your money, of course, so they can have more money. So those rainy days come for whoever, when they can't give Charlene McRae another $1 billion to make it disappear. She's a great magician, right? So what is your plan when you become controller to, let's say, with the city? Do you have any say over the city type budgets?
Well, it's interesting, and I forgot to answer that before because I was going to bring it up. Charlene McRae, and talking about the difference between thinking small and thinking large. Thrive New York City.
Yeah.
That was a city program, but it turns out only about, most of the funding came from the city, yes, about 77, 78%. But it turns out that the rest came from the federal and state government. So the thing is, the authority of the controller is that anywhere where state monies are being used, the controller has the authority to audit, to investigate. So it's obvious that Brad Lander doesn't really seem to care. The city council maybe doesn't care about what happened to that $1 billion plus from Thrive New York City. But in terms of one of the things that I could do as controller is actually audit. It's not called Thrive New York City anymore, but audit that, because I have actually extending an interest in doing so because state monies were used for there. And God knows that if we were able to discover what happened to that money, it sure would be a lot better than the $11,000 from that clerk who was padding for hours.
Say so. That would be wonderful if you could do that.
I mean, even if we got 10% of that money.
We got to have commercials for you just to say that thing alone, and I think you'll get a lot of votes.
But that's the thing. I mean, it's obviously Scott Stringer didn't care to investigate it. Brad Lander doesn't care to investigate it. And Brad Lander is now becoming basically Tom DiNapoli's protege.
Yes.
And he wants to be the next mayor. It's interesting, our current mayor, who hasn't done anything, he's been in office less than a
Well,
year.
great for the nightlife.
He hasn't done anything, but he already thinks that he can bring a lot of good policies to the presidency. It's like, you got money for president? You got to run out of Albany with your tail between your legs about cashless bill, but somehow you think you have solutions for the country as a whole.
Plant-based diet.
Why don't you think a little small? You're already mayor of New York. It's a pretty important job.
Yeah.
But if you haven't been in office a year, you have shown no success at it so far, but you think you have
Well, he's
the
very,
wherewithal to resolve the problems.
well, he's very generous. He offered a lot of city workers, the 1,400 or so that weren't vaccinated, their jobs back. You'd think, well, that's nice, with the caveat, you must get the shot.
Exactly, when
You know
you,
what? Too bad.
when you read that, you said, oh, they've reversed. They're gonna bring them back. So, oh, they're gonna bring them back. No, they're not gonna bring them back. Oh, they said, okay, fine. You wanna come back? Okay, we'll take you back. You're still gotta get vaccinated by this. So it's still the heavy hand of government. And again, not getting into deep social issues, but it's funny how all of a sudden we've revived body autonomy and my body, my choice. After 2 years, they told us we had no body autonomy and it wasn't my body, my choice, because the government could basically coerce you to inject yourself. Now, I mean, obviously injecting myself, I think everybody should make their decision, but frankly, I didn't like necessarily having to do it because, because if that somehow and particularly in this city, when de Blasio on December 27th decided, right as his parting gift, that if you didn't get vaccinated by then, you couldn't work. And there was no religious exemption, there was nothing. And all of a sudden, people were getting frantic at the end of the, during Christmas time, during the holidays, during Hanukkah, saying, oh, bleep, what am I gonna do come, the end of the year? I have no job unless I force myself to go out there and get a shot that I don't want.
Why do they have open borders so much? Is it to come and use these human beings to take away our jobs or to discontinue us?
Well, it's definitely cheap labor is what it is.
Well, then, isn't that what they're doing?
Cheap labor was what was the issue for many years. The other thing is they think those are gonna become Democratic voters.
Well, yeah, while they all got a surprise in Texas with the 84% Hispanics in that district.
Maida.
Where she won 51 to 43%, and had a commercial saying, "Hi, my husband supporter." God. So hopefully that will backfire to the Democrats because, as you mentioned before, they all think Hispanics are just one. You must vote Democrat, yeah, Democrat. Hello, there's other points of view out there. Okay, so.
Well, I put out that meme. I love that meme. I saw they had AOC, Latinx.
Yeah.
They had Mayra Flores, Latina. So I put out that meme and I put below any questions. I love it. Because, for us Latino, this whole Latinx thing is ridiculous because, like I said, growing up, I had two very perfectly inclusive and gender neutral terms. Latin and Hispanic. There was no need for another one. But those woke people said, oh, no, we want to sound more like, they did some cultural appropriation and said, I'm going to get to you. And they said, we want to make Latin Latino. Okay, Latino. But then they didn't realize that Romance languages are gendered languages. So hold on, that's triggering. We can't have gendered. We can't call it Latino anymore. So now let's do Latinx. Except that like 75, 80, 90% of Latinos hate that term. We'll never use it. Okay, let's do Latine with an accent. No, they don't like that one either. How about just calling it, now you get stuck. Because you could have just called this Latin or Hispanic. But then Hispanic versus Latin gets into the whole colonialism.
Who's on first?
But you could have just called this Latin, but no, you went to Latino. But now nobody wants to get away from Latino, because that's how you would say it in Spanish, Latino, Latina. So good luck with that, and people hate it, but the same white progressives who imposed that on us are the ones who are now pushing. It's funny, now they want to push it on us to use that term when it was not a term that we
So
wanted
why
or
can't we
liked
just say,
anyway.
forget about it?
We do.
Yeah,
I mean, even Latinos on the left don't, obviously they don't like it either. It's just, again, it's not the Latinos who like it. But I'm sorry, you had a question.
Okay, so
Yeah.
who has the authority to investigate offshore bank accounts of politicians?
Oh, that's a great.
Offshore bank accounts of politicians, that's a good,
Yeah,
that's a good
Like
question.
Charles Schwab?
Of state politicians or,
Well,
well, I know that there was a federal law some years back where, and this was done through the IRS, where you had to report all foreign bank accounts. So this was across the board, so I would presume to think it would be at the federal level, but this was a requirement that was put in by the federal government some years back, maybe 10 years ago, maybe less, that you had to report any bank accounts. So like, for example, my wife and I think might have had a bank account in Mexico one time, so we had to put it down because she's from Mexico. So, but things like that, because the idea was to kind of, not just politicians, everyone.
So that would be the IRS?
I'm not sure if it's the IRS per se. I know the IRS was one of the enforcement arms of it, whether they themselves, they probably do have
Maybe
an
it's just-
investigation, but that used to be a question
Campaign
on
finance.
the 1040. It used to say, do you have any foreign bank
Because
accounts?
they- yeah.
And if you did, you had to disclose them.